But we don't have a lot of time, so I did know Makara. And I have been, the HBCU Green Fund was selected in the first cohort of Justice40 Accelerator, which was amazing because I was telling the world it should be Justice 4, and maybe we would get it, but I was selected anyway. So, Makara, I'm asking you to introduce yourself and share about the accelerator and particularly any success stories. Okay. And do you have your own mic?
No.
Hello. So happy to be here. My name is Makara Rumley. I'm the founder and CEO of Hummingbird. We are a community engagement consulting firm. I'm also an environmental justice attorney by training and formerly worked at the EPA as senior advisor on community engagement. So it's a bit of a reunion for me getting to see some of my former colleagues in the room. So we have the benefit of doing environmental justice every single day, but from a for-profit approach. I decided that I wanted to change the way we do business, to change the structures, to change the institution, to change the standard operating procedure. Because if you don't do it in an equitable way, you're not going to get an equitable result. What you put in is what you're going to get out. And I had the opportunity to work with some nonprofit organizations, Partnership for Southern Equity, the Solutions Project, and Elevate, to say, hey, this executive order has come out, Justice40, it's what we've all been waiting for. But guess what? For those of you who used to watch The Roadrunner, I don't know if you ever saw the episode where the coyote caught the Roadrunner. When that happened, the coyote was this small, and the Roadrunner was as tall as this building. So we finally got what we've all been dreaming for, and we're like, whoa, we have to be prepared for this opportunity. So we worked together to create the Justice40 Accelerator. And the whole point was to make sure that community-based organizations were ready to apply for this federal funding, that they had the capacity, that they knew when opportunities were coming out, they knew what website to go to, who do you call, what do these proposals need to look like, what internal capacity do we need to have. And so the whole point was to prep folks to get ready for when the Roadrunner showed up. And we did that by giving $25,000 in unrestricted funding, providing one-on-one kind of a navigator role that Binga mentioned before that the USDA is doing. You want to do all these things, who do you call, how do you access these opportunities? And then also, we provided a lot of training on how you create a budget. What's the difference between outputs and outcomes? Just a lot of the language that the federal government uses that could be alienating in itself when you have reporting requirements. And we provided a lot of other resources. We had the benefit of having over 100 organizations, including the HBCU Green Fund, participate. And the last thing I would just mention is Matt Tejada talked about benefits. How do we measure these benefits? We all just think of quantitative. How much money, how many people, how many. But we have to change the way we're looking at metrics. It's qualitative as well. And we need the folks that are measuring to accept that. This is about changing lives. And you don't hear stories by looking at a number. You hear stories by listening to how something has benefited the overall quality of life and the impact where people live. That is a measurement. That needs to be respected. That needs to be included. And so you have this very, very traditional measurements that needs to shift, giving people the opportunity to get ready, to be ready. and then also supporting them in their growth and change. And we were able to do that with the Justice40 Accelerator.
Thank you. That deserves a round. And 25,000, especially for some of the other organizations in the cohort, was transformative. So with that, I'm going to jump to Maria, who I'm just meeting, but I'm from Jersey, but I didn't know anything about your story. And so I really want you to share with the audience. I did hear about that historic environmental justice cumulative impact. We all know that. So I really, I'm interested in knowing the story behind the story, and if you would share a little bit more about the whole ICC history.
Yes, thank you for having us here. Thank you to the panelists. So I'll start with the Iron Bomb, right? I'm Maria Lopez Nunez. I'm with the Iron Bomb Community Corporation in Newark, New Jersey. We're all here for Climate Week. I tell you one thing, I know where the trash from Climate Week is coming, right? Because the trash is going to end up in my neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey, where when folks fly into New York City, they don't think about a place like Newark. And I would say in most cities, when you see the glamorous part in places like Manhattan, there's sacrifice zones all over. We're in what used to be one before, right? Before it was gentrified. It's in the Bronx, it's in Brooklyn, in Queens, Staten Island, and Newark. It's over on the Jersey side as well. I mean, what are these boundaries from the colonizer anyway? So my neighborhood, I'll be quick, is 4 square miles, and it has 3 power plants, a garbage incinerator, the biggest waste treatment facility in our region. It accepts waste from 12 different states. We're only 4 square miles, but we have the longest Superfund site in the country, where we had the production of Agent Orange and dioxin, the byproduct. It was just being dumped into the river and wheeled around town, where the kids in my neighborhood and folks I work with, they were swimming in the pools that were contaminated with dioxin. So our organization is 54 years old. That is a long institutional memory of the failures of government, for sure. But I do acknowledge the historic momentum of this moment, but I think it's only made real by the communities who have been suffering. We know better than anything, Tank, how government works. If the policy will work, you don't need to waste your time. I mean, I would love to say this directly to philanthropy and to government. Don't waste your time with consultants and even academia. I love y'all, but there's a lot of grants where academia is skimming 30% off the top. That sounds extractive as hell. So for everyone that's trying to help us, I want it to be clear. Help us. Don't take from us, because our communities have been suffering, and we've known for a long time that with climate change, it's only going to get worse. And it's not just about flood, it's about the toxic flood waters that are going to come into our neighborhood. So that's just a little bit about us. And yes, we passed the strongest environmental justice law in the country that denies permits. It does not leave it up to the government discretion, because we know how that ends up. But I also want to say, like Mustafa was saying before, it's intersectional. In the same year, we passed some of the strongest anti-eviction COVID protections, where no one who was affected by COVID could be evicted from their home. And all you have to do is sign an affidavit. We didn't make it complicated, and we have a lot of lessons for government on that.
Thank you. So I say, Nick, because the indigenous communities are really working hard to resurrect old ways. At the same time, it seems like we're racing into a new artificial intelligence age. And I just am hoping that you can share really what it means. How does that reach back impact the work, and how is that really reinforcing community? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Hamid Akyapi, Nick Tilsen, and Wajapi, Chunt El, Washington, Apechu Zapolo. I greet you in my Lakota language with the warm heartfelt handshake. I'm a Wall Lakota from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and it's good to be with all of you here today. I think one of the biggest realities that we're faced with is like, and I always talk about this, like in every indigenous language in the world, there's a saying that we're all interconnected and we're all related. Like in my language, it's medakuyase, that we are all related. But it's all systems and all things and all people. And I think that what we're dealing with when we talk about climate change is a breakdown of those systems. A breakdown of the siloing of economic systems and education systems and government systems that are disconnected with one another. And although this is like a very exciting time with all these resources coming into communities, we got to really think about what we're trying to build for the future. How do we reconnect and build those systems that have been deprioritized over time? How do we build affordable housing that's not just about build the same type of housing and then try to put as many solar panels on there? How come we're not looking at the real income levels of our communities and the real scenarios that they're dealing with in their communities? And so we really have to think about outside of the box integrated approaches. And it's not easy, and it's not a quick fix. There is no silver bullet, right? But we have to take that intentionality. And I think that what I've seen in the work at NDN Collective is way before there was an Inflation Reduction Act, and way before these things were all in place, the NDN Collective has been supporting over about 700 indigenous communities throughout North America. It's the biggest philanthropic fund managed by and for indigenous people in the history of philanthropy. And we only started 5 years ago. Because the history of philanthropy with indigenous communities has been extractive. Less than 0.5% of philanthropy in America goes to Native communities. So when we're sitting back in these situations and thinking about all these new federal investments coming into our community, we're dealing with a situation where indigenous communities have already been invisibilized by the field of philanthropy, even though we have the federal government sitting up here saying, hey, we need philanthropy to show up. Well, the reality is we need philanthropy to show up differently than they have ever showed up before, and prioritizing impacted communities, and not middle of the road organizations, but people who are on the ground, in the streets, on the land, taking those risks. And so NDN Collective has built that infrastructure. All of our grant making is 100% of our grant making is discretionary. We do not do non-discretionary funding, and we do it in the form of Indigenous self-determination grants. And so, and what we've seen in that path is that you end up supporting people in their journey to innovation. As they're innovating, creating new ideas, rebuilding new ideas, in a 700 organization portfolio of about $50 million in grants, we've seen about 71% of those communities focusing on something related to climate. But we didn't specifically call Indian Self-Determination Grant Program a climate program, right? We called it with exactly what it was, which was investing into Indigenous self-determination. We need philanthropy to really see what communities are creating from the ground up in that way. And it's not just opportunistic based on what is, at the forefront right now. Because I think that when you look at the rebuilding of indigenous food systems, indigenous economic systems, we're talking about resilient, regenerative solutions, and there's so many lessons to learn from those communities. And the vast majority of indigenous communities are willing to share those lessons that are based on, historical indigenous ecological knowledge.
So as we all do this work, there are, maybe not enough, but there are examples of great successes, right? Where it's just the outcome just far outdistances the expectation. So I want to go down the road with each of you to really just share, because I think we take a lot from, we know our challenges well, but we don't often hear and celebrate our successes. So Makara, with how many cohorts?
Over 100 across
Yeah.
35 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C.
So can you share one that just stands out for you in terms of success? Somebody must have gotten a good big grant or...
I'm not going to focus on just one. I think it's really important that people define what they consider to be their benefits. So I don't want to say what I think has benefited them, but what I would say, in increasing their subject matter expertise and their access to funding and financial resources, it's increased confidence.
Peggy Shelby. Peggy is not late. We started early, so...
So I would say that, welcome. I would say that it increased their confidence, their ability to identify what they need to strengthen, and also to amplify their success. And it's interesting, I just want to thank you, Maria, because that cumulative impact policy in New Jersey, I get called all the time from other states saying, we want what they have. How do we get there? I know it was so hard to get there, but what it has done is created a tidal wave on what the environmental justice community has been asking for decades, and the response has been, well, we can't really do that, and all the reasons why it can't be done. So then when there's an example of showing that it was done, then that can't be the answer anymore. So that was really a tidal wave. So thank you for that. So in addition to that and those examples of what other organizations are doing, it was a win, Felicia, because we created a cohort of community-based organizations doing the work. We made sure they knew who each other was. The work is so hard, you feel isolated and you feel alone, and you're not thinking about what's going on in New Jersey. You're not thinking about what's going on, the Pueblos or indigenous lands or where you are, because you're so focused on surviving. But then when a platform was created where you can actually connect with each other, peer to peer, share your success stories, share your challenges, I just think that interaction is very, very important. The last thing that I would say is that institutional knowledge. That's the terminology that a lot of times is used when you're talking about the government. You have people like Cynthia Purifoy, who Matt Tejada mentioned earlier. When she retired, all of her connections and relationships left with her. So how do we make sure that how do we create that repository of the stories and the connections? And one of the ways that we do that is making sure that the folks who are doing the work are connected to each other.
Yes. Thank you. And I'm going to jump, since Peggy has arrived and settled in, and we settled in, we land quickly. But first of all, I want to recognize leadership in the environmental justice movement, climate justice movement, and certainly lift up the fact that Peggy said that she was going to have a climate justice pavilion at COP, which is no small endeavor at all. And what she was able to accomplish that, and what it provided was a landing place for climate justice, particularly people of color globally, to land when we were in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. So for that, personally, I want to recognize the fact that you said it and you did it, which is great. We don't see that very often, and really appreciate the fact that we had some place to be, and I thank you for that. But so you have from the, what do they say, the sweets to the streets, right? And when it comes to Justice40, you have been in a position to influence and help structure at the rollout, some of the thinking. And I'm sure you also have a very critical eye in examining J40 at this point along the way. No easy questions. So, just broadly speaking, because this is a conversation about community and kind of where we go now. So I just open the floor to you to really hear, for this audience, to hear your perspective on Justice40 at this point in the journey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for being a little late. The Climate Week traffic has already started. It was crazy just trying to come down Broadway. But if you see me sort of eyeing Maria and giving a little smirk, it's because we both serve on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and we both served on the first Justice40 Implementation Committee that made the first recommendations almost 2 years ago now. So, you know, it's debatable about influence, certainly access. It's really important to have access. It's important that we're at the table. But we also have realized over the years that once you're at the table, you've got to have some expertise back in your organization so that you go back to that table with some documents, with some research, with some data, because the other folks can do that. And when we can't, we truly suffer, because we do have a bit of access now. And we've got to be ready when they say, okay, great idea, how much is it going to cost? And then we're like, oh God, we'll get back to you. Because we haven't had that kind of research and data gathering in our own organizations because we haven't had the resources. Yeah. So yes, we have influence. We have our voices, our perspectives. WeJack is diverse. It represents all the demographics, ethnic groups, geographies, rural and urban. And we are trying to make a difference. I think we've made incremental steps toward that, but are we anywhere near where we need to be? Absolutely not. And so Justice40 has been rolled out in the federal government. It's taken probably a good 2 years for them to really get their footing. You know, when you talk about developing what could be transformational in this country, and you talk about it, you hire one or two staff to do it, and then you think those 1 or 2 people are going to change 20 to 25 federal agencies that have been doing their own thing for 1 million years, have no idea what climate or environmental justice is, and most of them aren't interested in knowing. Not all of them, but most, but you know, people are used to doing things the same old way. And so here we come, and we're talking about, why don't you have an EJ advisory in every agency? Then you wouldn't have to wonder, you wouldn't have to be calling people to review your documents, because you would have not only the staffing, but you would have your own advisory group to really vet and to help you out on how you're really going to implement. Because right now what you're really asking me in terms of status is about implementation. Yeah. It's beyond concept. It's beyond, yes, such a great vision. So how is it going to roll out? So what we now see is an incredible amount of money, billions of dollars going out for clean energy projects, community development projects. And guess what? Nobody is prepared or has the capacity to address it. And guess what? Not even the federal agencies. I mean, EPA is stumbling to get money out the door. My organization has been awarded a Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center. I think we got notice of the award in April. It was around Earth Day. And we got something just as I was in the cab coming here. saying that if we sign some other little paper, it looks like the contract will happen. That's from April to September. And everybody's like, well, the money's going out the door. When are you going to help us get started? You know, we're just about to sign the contract with the EPA. After, what is this, 4 months or so? So, again, bureaucracy doesn't move quickly. It takes a lot of political savvy and I don't know, just what, personality and assertiveness and stroking the right people to make a difference with all of these agencies. I think Dr. Lon Newsom is doing a good job. But she's really trying to turn the 16-wheel truck. And so, what has to happen now? Billions are going out from federal agencies. They're coming into your state, they're coming into your city. And
No, that's not what
so I guess that was the EPA. So they got the word already. But, you know, so the money's coming into your city and state. Now, maybe you're all in New York and you live in a slightly more progressive state or New Jersey. But even if you do, how many of you would know? So suppose you have a transit project or you have, you develop a community center and a green zone in your neighborhood. How many of you know who to call to access money for that? Raise your hand. Okay, but how many of you have an idea for a project? Okay, but you don't know where to go. And so, we don't know where to go. And we have access. And so what we're trying to do is now provide the advocacy back home to ensure that we can get the money that we've been trying to get the federal government to push to our communities, and now how do we get it? So, you know, I've been talking with some Bar Association men to write a letter to the governor and to the mayor to appoint a liaison on Justice40 and the IRA money, because the IRA money has the billions. And so that we at least have a one-stop shop where we can call one person and find out where to go. If you have a project, like we have this project in East Harlem to kind of revitalize the commercial strip, well, there's a lot of money for that, but it involves about 10 agencies. So how am I, as one organization, going to go around to 10 city and state agencies to try and coordinate them so that we can get the money that's sitting there in our grasp, but we might not be able to get it. And it might go to the same old folks who've always been getting it, the same old businesses, no new entrepreneurs. So do we have a lot of opportunity? We do. But if we don't organize to get that opportunity, we will miss it. And we need organizations like Columbia University and all of these institutions that are in our neighborhoods to help us do that. They have influence. I believe somebody from Columbia University can get the governor or the mayor on the phone. I mean, well, they can. And we need all of our folks who are interested in sustaining our communities to do just that. What's picking up a phone call when you have access to make something happen? What's convening a meeting of different parties who may not be able to get together on their own to make something happen? It doesn't take a lot of resources, and people already have the access. Yeah. So we really have to network and develop collective action if we're going to make what's here a real opportunity. Because I'm telling you, I'm older, but people who are under 30 are telling me this may be the biggest amount of investment that they will see in their lifetime. Think about that.
Well, that's quite a charge. I'll just go to the other end of the panel to pick up on we were starting with success stories and wins, but I'm not going to narrow it. So I'm opening to what you want to bring to the conversation.
Oof, that's a dangerous door, Anything I want to bring, I'm actually a little shy, freaking out for you here. But,
Shy?
yeah. I know how to do my job. Because that's the thing about being in a grassroots organization. We're expected to be damn superheroes, right? Because somehow I got to convince people who hate the government for good reason. Let's participate this time. This time it might be different. And I also know it is billions of dollars. We're walking on the weed track, and I think anywhere where an environmental justice person is visible, we're walking on a tightrope. We're trying to figure it out between being credible and keeping our reputation to our communities, pushing philanthropy, but not too much so that they cut us off, right? We need those resources, just the reality, right? Pushing academic partners to be better and not to replicate this, because why don't we have research in our communities? It's because we've always had to outsource it, because those are the relationships that philanthropy sometimes put us in. Don't build your own capacity, just partner with someone, even though they get the bulk of the grant and they get to build their own internal capacities, and not us at home, right? It is time to leave expertise in the field, to leave it at the base. Right now, I think we're in a dangerous moment because so much, there's been like a brain drain from the grassroots, because guess who knows how to do environmental justice? You can't really learn this in school. You have to learn it by rough experience from getting beat up by industry that definitely wants to kill us, right? It is a dangerous time to be fighting oil and gas, because it's, when the beast is dying, it grasps for air and it's trying to take our communities with it. And so in that moment, we need allyship, and I would say both the call to philanthropy, academia, and government is help us keep our brain trust at home. Help us build our capacities, because I fundamentally believe that folks on the front line, y'all that I'm up here, and the many in the audience, right? I see Jade out there. All of us, we really know what we're doing, because we've been doing it, studying the ship. I look up to Ms. Peggy and how long you've been able to hold out and give a rigor to the work that we need to bring as our communities right now. Like I said, I'm talking to my community, I'm talking to everyone. I gotta figure out how to code switch, but not too much, so I don't get called out by folks at home, right? We have to hold, it feels like we're holding the world and the complexities in this moment, and I fundamentally believe we'll push forward. And it might not be in my lifetime, but eventually our descendants will see the benefit of all our work.
Your thoughts?
I think one of the things that I think about a lot when I think about the climate crisis and I think about these investments, I think the plight of Indigenous people and the stealing of our land has a direct correlation to the climate crisis that we're in. And this entire country, this campus, every single one of the EJ communities that exist in this country were built on the stolen land of Indigenous people. And so, we've been building this land back movement, this movement, and this would be the example or the victory story or the path towards victory, or maybe creating the conditions for victory. That we're talking about is that, in the land back movement, we're talking about the return of stolen Indigenous lands back into Indigenous hands for the sake of Mother Earth and for the sake of humanity. The data is there. We don't need somebody to prove that the data exists. 70% of the world's biodiversity that is left because it's in the control of the hands of Indigenous people. That's just not true inside of the United States, which shows how far beyond and how far away from the United States is, at when dealing with Indigenous people. And I think what we've seen is a land back movement. It didn't come from a think tank. It didn't come from a committee, the federal government. It didn't come from a marketing company or a policy shop. It came from the front lines. It came from those of us that were on the front lines fighting the biggest corporations that have ever existed in the world, the biggest colonial governments that have ever existed in this world. And we simply were like, if we had our land back, this fight would be totally different. If we had our land back, they would need consent to come across our lands. And as a result, there would be less pipelines, there would be less extractive industry, and climate change wouldn't be where it's at. So what we're watching in this moment is that many of the solutions exist there. I mean, this country does have to have a reckoning, a racial reckoning with itself. And this country cannot have a racial reckoning with itself that does not include the conversation about land back and the return of indigenous lands back into indigenous hands. It is impossible. It's not only impossible, it's that we're not going to achieve environmental or climate justice without having it, or without creating actionable steps towards that. And so that's where we're investing a huge amount of our work, is positioning indigenous communities to build their capacity to return and have the future of the entire future of conservation as a whole be indigenous-led conservation, focused on the returning of indigenous lands back into indigenous hands. And we're beginning to see that.
So I want to end on a high note. However, I guess a nagging concern that I have is that we're witnessing the largest transfer of wealth, certainly in our lifetime. And this has happened before, but those of us that, and now I'm going to speak personally and kind of somewhat from the Black community perspective, not wanting to be in the position if Justice40 is used, we all become vigorous advocates. The transfer is going down, and we're having a conversation about our inability to draw down on any of it in the immediate sense, and even in the foreseeable, say, decade. At the same time that we're seeing this gray-haired transition. So there's certainly on the horizon a next gen rising. So that is the lay of the land as I see it, and a really deep concern. And given that, so notwithstanding all of our efforts to accelerate, how do we ensure that we don't end up further behind? Back at the start. So, and maybe I'm off, maybe I'm cynical, maybe I'm missing something, but I've just recently, my organization has gotten 2 commas for the first time. And so, well, y'all can afford that. But I'm saying, just imagining 3 or 4, imagining what it takes, imagining particular Peggy on you scaling up to even help us scale more. And this, money won't even solve that, right? And yet we can't get the money that we could pour in, and even if we burn it, I'm okay with that. Drop $1 billion on Peggy, and if it doesn't work out, I'm okay. But it's hard to think, and who in here can really conceptualize $1 billion? 1,000 million. Okay, so each of you, somebody send them my emails. So, yeah, I just want to put that out there, because I don't want it to be a dark vision, but that's how I see the challenge before us, and the moment could easily slip by. So does anybody else have that concern?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely all have that concern. And so, you know, through these technical assistance centers that have been set up, we're going to try to help people write grants for large federal grants that they may or may not be able to manage. It's not, we're just so unprepared. And I think the golden ring that I see in all this is that it's made me understand the level of organizing that has to happen that we haven't done. You know, because we haven't had the opportunity. So, you know, when I'm thinking about all of this money coming out for entrepreneurs, so, you know, we do this worker training for solar installers. And so some of the guys decided to start a solar worker cooperative because, you know, they can't get in the union. And they started it, they've incorporated, they've been bidding on jobs. And then you find out, well, they now have to have enough money in the bank for a payroll. And they're getting, you know, their money through a contract, but it's not enough to meet a weekly payroll. And then you find out, well, they can't really apply to get an MBE, Minority Business Enterprise status with the city without, guess what, $25,000 in the bank. $25,000 in the bank. So now you wonder, like, well, why don't more people have, you know, why aren't there more entrepreneurs? Why aren't there more black, you know, businesses? And then when you drill down and you find out these issues, or when the Secretary of Energy, Commissioner Granholm, Secretary Granholm came to look at some solar installations, and then she wanted to hear from people, and then we find out all of the small elements that really keep solar installations from happening in certain communities. Somebody called me from Boston when he heard that I've been talking about these issues and said, well, their problem, this is a black entrepreneur who runs a solar installation company. He said their problem is that the electrical engineer, the electrical union, has legislation that says they have to sign off on, you know, any project which apparently increases the cost so significantly that they can't make a profit. What can I do about that? And I'm like, I can't do anything about your union legislation. You better start electing the right people. But in other words, what I'm trying to say is that in all of these areas that we're concerned about and interested in, there's these subtle, you know, there's these subtle obstacles. Yeah. And they're real obstacles. It's just that we don't know until we drill down. Yeah. And these are why people are doing what we think they should be doing, why it's so easy to access all of these opportunities. There isn't, but the problem is that we're not collectively convening to understand what's really going on with worker training. Yes. You know, what's really going on? We're just training thousands of people for no jobs. Mm-hmm. You know, why don't we all come together, the people doing worker training and yes, people of color who are doing it, and really talk about what are the obstacles here, and then what do we need to overcome them and access this money. And we need to be doing that in every field. Yes. But we just aren't coming together. That's right, in the way we need. And, you know, the environmental justice movement, you know, I've been talking to, you know, a bunch of folks in the movement, and we're like, some people like, well, why hasn't the civil rights and social justice movements really helped, or why aren't they, you know, in sync with us? Exactly. And, you know, we've been talking to people about this since the 70s, when the sort of environmental regulation and all the big green groups first started. And it just appears as though environmental law is so different. You need scientists, you need public health people, because so much of it is the science of environmental exposure on the land, on animals, and on people. And a lot of civil rights groups, you know, they have the expertise they need for for voting rights and some of those issues, police brutality, but they don't have the scientific expertise. And I guess their thinking is it sustainable for us to try to do that? And so, for a variety of reasons, we haven't had that support. And so we've been out here alone. And once you put the word environment there,
Yeah.
it gives us a hard way to go. And because people don't realize we're doing democracy work. We are getting people most elected to engage in decisions about this stuff. That's called democracy. And this is about our rights, our racial and civil rights, our social justice rights, and we've got to make that more visible and prominent. And I hope we can, we've got so many smart people, I hope we can all come together and maybe together figure that out and create the kind of think tank, the kind of repository of expertise that we need if we're really going to compete and if we're really going to take advantage of the opportunities that have been presented.
Yes.
Thank you. So as we close, or before we close, since I came out of the civil rights, social justice wing of the world, and actually did a lot of work in Atlanta with Dr. Joseph Lowry and others, who within, I think, environmental justice, broadly speaking, has been challenged over time to have, one, to have an environmental movement that was clung tenaciously to silos, and then to have a movement that says it's all of the above, every piece of it. And then from the civil rights perspective, thinking that we can't change policy if we don't have who we want, and if we're not able to vote and get the right people in. And then if we're going back, I'm thinking of Cecil and Damu and others who in Atlanta we got to call damn you, but damn you would come in and we will follow the directive. So in this moment, I'm thinking that we all get it. And when we opened up the day, we opened up with a sense of urgency. And I think that it is going to take alliance. And we're going to have to lean on the folks with a lot of resources. Like Columbia, I'm just saying, coming in here from the Atlanta University Center and we walk in, everything is working. That's number one. But number two, on yesterday, Clark Atlanta flooded.
Oh, what?
Flooded. So with millions of dollars of water retention projects, it's flooded. So that's just for me, and wrapping up, saying that we have to stay together beyond this stage or this setting. And this is not our normal panel, right? Because we are warriors in the vineyard together, and we have to back each other up. And we do have the talent to get it done. We just haven't aligned it.
Right.
And we haven't put the call strong enough, hard enough, so that because everybody will show up. I know the civic arena, the civil rights arena, when we put the priority to them, everybody doesn't have to be a scientist or an economist or a mathematician. But we need everybody right now. And maybe, as dark as I'm seeing the moment, maybe we can just dig deep. Dig deep. We have, not that we're skating along, but this is the moment, especially these next gen people with artificial intelligence, everything. So I want to thank each of you. I'm going to give Nick the closing, because indigenous people, all that with the land, I'm small-minded thinking about, well, what about my house? But another conversation. But I'm going to let you close us out And I'm hoping to hear a little more of that Lakota language, because when I hear it, I feel like I understand it. It's so beautiful, so yes.
Yeah, I think, I guess what I think is, like, we are the future ancestors, but that is the truth. And so they're gonna look to us and say, what did, in this moment in history, with all the things that we're faced with, what did we do? What was our sense of urgency in the middle of this climate crisis? How much were we willing to envision the very world, that we're fighting for? What is that vision? And that's why I think that we have to keep thinking bold. I mean, when you ask who can think billions, my first thing was like, I'm trying to raise a couple billion right now, because it's what's required, right? It's required for implementation. But we have to think about dismantling of the systems at the same time. I mean, I think that some of it's almost like that the dismantling of systems does not get celebrated the same way as quote-unquote innovations. When at the same time, like, tearing down the shit that has destroyed us is an innovation, if you ask me. And it's we're in the middle of a struggle. We have to acknowledge the struggle that we're in the middle of. We have to create what those bold visions are. I mean, I think that, like, there's a lot of talk about democracy. There's a lot of talk of democracies at stake. There's a lot of talk of what this form of American democracy, who has it served? It definitely has not served Mother Earth. It just definitely has not served the environment. And so when we think about what a multiracial democracy looks like in the future, it's probably not the one that we're operating off of right now. And so, but is it possible? Hell yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think that one revolutionary once said, and I think it was Fidel Castro who said this, a revolution is not a bed of roses. It is a struggle between the past and the future. And if we think about that in the context of where we are in right now, like, aren't we in a revolution? And if we are, we should be acting like it. So, I think that the solutions that we're faced with have to be at least as big as the challenges that we're faced with. And I think that it's time for radical action, and it has to be from the ground up, not the top down. So.
We're out of time. No questions. I know we just had the microphones there for props, so thank you. But thank the panel again, and one more round.